The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Wolfshire like a burial shroud, but inside St Bartholomew's Church, the air burned with something far more sinister than autumn fog. Margot de Clare stood at the ancient stone altar, her bare feet pressed against cold marble that had seen centuries of prayer, and now something that mocked the very idea of divine mercy. Her breath came quick and shallow, each exhale visible in the smoky air. Torches flickered along the weathered walls like dying stars, while the smell of burning oak mixed with something sharper, something metallic, that made the congregation's stomachs turn. Beside the altar, 3 iron bars glowed cherry red in a brazier. Heat shimmered from them, enough to feel from 20 paces away. Margot's hands trembled as she reached toward the instruments of her judgment. Every corner of the church was packed. 300 villagers, merchants, peasants, even the bailiff himself stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, waiting. Some crossed themselves over and over. Others wiped sweat from their brows despite the October chill. The charge had spread through Wolfshire like wildfire. Adultery. Margaret Whitmore, the baker's wife, claimed she'd seen Margot leaving the miller's cottage at dawn, hair unkempt, clothes disordered. In medieval England, testimony like that wasn't just rumour. It carried the weight of divine revelation. Father Benedict lifted his gnarled hands, his voice cutting through the silence. Almighty God, who knowest all things hidden and revealed. His Latin prayers echoed against the stone, words soaked into walls that had witnessed centuries of baptisms and funerals, but never anything like this. Because this wasn't just a burst of mob anger, it was trial by ordeal, a legal institution as official and structured as any royal court. There were procedures, rules, even written guidelines. These rituals weren't rare accidents of ignorance. They were the backbone of justice in Christian Europe, endorsed by kings, sanctified by the Church, and performed in thousands of parishes. And before we see Margot's fate, let me say this. If you're drawn to the chilling truths of history, subscribe. Because what medieval courts called divine justice will challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. The rules for Margot's ordeal weren't improvised. They had been refined by centuries of scholars and churchmen. Canon lawyers argued over details as specific as the temperature of the iron, the exact prayers that had to be spoken, the length of fasting required before the ceremony. It wasn't superstition. It was systematic theology applied to human flesh. Margot's case was just one among thousands. In Norman England alone, church records suggest ordeals like this happened regularly, thousands each year. Survival wasn't about evidence or witnesses, it was about enduring pain and hoping God would intervene. The iron bars pulsed, with deadly light as Margot stepped closer to the altar. In that moment, her entire life hung between salvation and damnation. To the villagers, she wasn't just a woman on trial. She was part of a vast experiment, an attempt to force divine truth into the world through human suffering. Her fingers hovered inches from the glowing metal, and that's when the true horror of the ordeal became clear. This wasn't designed by angry neighbours or corrupt officials. It was crafted by the most educated men of their age, learned theologians, who believed with absolute certainty that God's justice could only be revealed through human agony. The architects of Margot's torment weren't acting on impulse. Their ideas reach back through centuries of legal evolution, their roots buried deep in the warrior traditions of ancient Germania. Long before Charlemagne placed the imperial crown on his head, Germanic tribes had already been settling disputes by calling on the gods, casting lots, walking through fire, or fighting duels that let the divine decide. What started as crude appeals to pagan spirits was reshaped by the Carolingian scholars into something far more polished and infinitely more dangerous. In 789, Charlemagne's Capitula de Villis didn't just legalize trial by ordeal, it turned it into a system, a bureaucracy of divine judgment that would last for centuries and swallow up countless lives like Margot's. His scribes, hunched over parchment by candlelight in monastery scriptoria, laid out rules that read like technical manuals for torture, instructions for how to build furnaces, exact water temperatures, and prayers that transformed each ordeal into a sacred ritual. The reasoning had a terrifying logic. If God was all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly just, as Augustine and Aquinas insisted, then he would never allow the innocent to suffer wrongly. The same God who counted every sparrow's fall would surely step in to shield the faithful. Seen through this lens, ordeal wasn't torture at all. It was prayer made physical. It was a way to bypass human error and let heaven speak directly through flesh and fire. The methods themselves stagger the modern imagination. Trial by hot iron, like the one Margot faced, forced the accused to carry glowing bars for 9 paces, their hands then bound in blessed cloth for 3 days. If the wounds healed clean, innocence was proven. If they festered, guilt was confirmed. Trial by cold water bound the accused and cast them into consecrated pools. The innocent sank and often drowned. The guilty floated, their bodies rejected by water too pure to receive them. There was trial by hot water, where an accused criminal reached into a boiling cauldron to retrieve a blessed stone from the bottom. The depth of the plunge, wrist deep for petty crimes, elbow deep for serious ones, marked the weight of the charge. Trial by combat turned treason and murder into brutal spectacles, and in trial by cross, 2 men stood with arms outstretched until one collapsed, his weakness taken as divine judgment. Each ordeal was wrapped in elaborate ritual. Priests blessed the iron, the water, the weapons. Communities fasted, attended special masses, and joined processions that gave the event the weight of a holy festival. The accused underwent purification rites, confession, communion, even ceremonial baths, so their souls could be laid bare before God. The psychology behind it was devastating. Europe's brightest minds, bishops trained in canon law, nobles steeped in rhetoric, scholars fluent in theology, truly believed that God intervened in real time. If he cooled the iron or calmed the boiling water, the innocent would walk free. If not, guilt was revealed. This wasn't ignorance at the edges of society. It was a belief upheld by the very centre of Christian intellectual life. Refusing to undergo an ordeal was considered heresy, a denial that God acted in human affairs. University scholars even wrote treatises explaining how divine miracles could work through natural means, how God might alter heat, water, or flesh to reveal truth. The ordeal's power came from this terrifying mix of theological certainty and bureaucratic order. Court records across Europe show thousands of trials carried out with chilling precision. Learned judges oversaw them, following every ritual to the letter, as men and women were condemned, or rarely spared, based not on testimony or reason, but on how their bodies withstood deliberate mutilation. The ordeal turned torture into worship, agony into revelation, and human suffering into a language through which God was expected to speak. Behind this vast machinery of sanctified torment stood men whose names deserve to echo alongside history's darkest architects. Take Archbishop Hincmar of Reims. Writing in 860 AD, he didn't just endorse trial by ordeal, he refined it. His treatise De Devotio laid out instructions with the precision of an engineer of suffering. To heat the iron, exactly 12 Pater Nosters were to be recited. Then 3 Ave Marias to ensure God's blessing over the instrument of judgment. Hincmar treated torture like holy ritual, scripture laced with citations, theology built into every excruciating detail. This wasn't chaos, it was bureaucracy, and it was chilling in its precision. Hot iron trials weren't judged by guesswork, they were timed to prayer. The bar was ready when it glowed like the sun at midday, achieved, they said, through 47 recitations of specific psalms. Water trials demanded exact weights: 12 pounds of stone tied to an accused thief, 24 for an accused murderer, and the scales, church approved, blessed each year on the Feast of St. Michael. Even fasting was regulated with pharmaceutical detail: 3 days without food before a fire ordeal, 5 before a water trial. Only blessed bread and holy water allowed, all under priestly supervision. Defendants were denied sleep for 12 hours leading into judgment, ensuring they faced their ordeal weak, trembling, and mentally broken. Across Europe, churches reshaped themselves into chambers of divine torture. St. Augustine's Cathedral in Canterbury built a consecrated furnace just for ordeal irons, its flames fed with wood blessed by the Archbishop himself. Notre Dame in Paris maintained a marble pool for water trials, carved angels looking down with serene faces as the accused struggled beneath the surface. But make no mistake, there was profit in this pain. Ordeals weren't free. Churches charged fees: 5 silver marks for trial by fire, 3 for trial by water, plus costs for priests, materials and ceremonies. Records from Winchester Cathedral alone show more than 300 marks a year earned from ordeal fees. It was a marketplace of human agony, dressed up as God's justice. And it got worse. Harsh judgments often brought more income, guilty verdicts meant property seizures, penance fees, and fines. Innocence, on the other hand, ended the revenue stream. Some cathedrals became infamous for their severity, drawing accusers from miles away who wanted reliable condemnations. The psychological tactics would impress even modern interrogators. Defendants were kept in isolation, sermons of hellfire ringing in their ears, cut off from family or comfort. They were denied sleep, forced into midnight prayers, dawn confessions, endless chanting. By the time the ordeal began, their minds and bodies were already shattered. In places where demand outstripped supply, a new profession appeared: travelling ordealers, specialists who hauled portable furnaces, consecrated stones, and clerical paperwork that allowed them to stage ordeals anywhere. They were paid handsomely for their skills, building reputations for trials that shocked crowds and filled church coffers. Master Hugo of Cluny gained notoriety across France for his blessed weapons, designed to make trial by combat both spectacular and lethal. Brother Adelard of Bath became famous for water trials, carefully adjusting methods so just enough defendants survived to preserve the illusion of mercy, while plenty were still condemned. Their techniques spread across monastic networks, standardizing torture from England to Italy. And the documents they left behind. They reveal minds of astonishing theological sophistication, entirely devoted to justifying inhumanity. These men believed with absolute conviction that they were instruments of divine justice, servants of a higher truth. That conviction turned tragedies like Margot's into something far worse. Not an isolated act of cruelty, but a system that converted suffering into ritual, agony into revelation, and human beings into data points in a grand experiment of sanctified pain. The true human cost of this machinery of divine justice lives on in the records, charter rolls, monastery chronicles, and court documents that preserved thousands of tragedies. Take the case of Willem the Cooper, written in the Winchester Cathedral archives in 1198. Accused of stealing silver candlesticks from St. Swithin's shrine, he carried the glowing iron for 9 paces, exactly as required. His hands healed cleanly, proving his innocence. But the scars remained: twisted flesh, shortened fingers, For the next 30 years, Willem lived as a marked man, technically vindicated, yet branded by his community as someone tainted by judgment. He could no longer work his trade, and he never regained full standing in village life. No ordeal embodied the system's cruelty more than the trial by cold water. The logic was a death trap. The innocent were meant to sink beneath the consecrated surface, but often drowned before priests could drag them out. Those who floated, whether from body fat, air in clothing, or sheer panic, were declared guilty and executed. The Abbey of St. Denis recorded 47 water ordeals between 1180 and 1215. 23 people drowned, proving their innocence after death. 19 floated and were hanged. Only 5 survived both the ordeal and its aftermath. A survival rate so low, cold water ordeal became almost synonymous with a death sentence. Gender shaped the machinery of accusation as much as theology. Women were targeted primarily for adultery, witchcraft, and property disputes, cases that threatened male authority over sexuality, faith, and land. Canterbury Cathedral's records show 127 female ordeals between 1190 and 1210, and nearly 2/3 of them were for adultery. Men, by contrast, faced trials mostly for theft, murder, or political crimes, offences against property and order, rather than challenges to the structure of male control. The reasoning behind this was built into the theology. Scholars argued women were more spiritually fragile, more prone to demonic influence, and therefore in greater need of divine exposure. At the same time, their supposed physical weakness meant that God's protection of an innocent woman would appear even more miraculous, making her ordeal a more dramatic spectacle. Communities, desperate under the shadow of ordeal, developed survival strategies. Some accused tried to toughen their skin, building calluses by pressing their hands against hot metal in secret practice. Others trained their lungs in mill ponds and rivers, learning to hold breath long enough to appear convincingly innocent beneath the water's surface. There was even a black market in charms, blessed oils, and fraudulent relics, sold to the desperate as protection against holy fire and consecrated water. Refusing ordeal was rare, but when it happened, the punishment was catastrophic. In 1204, Godwin of Exeter refused the hot iron, calling it blasphemy to demand miracles from God. His defiance cost him everything. His land was seized, his children declared illegitimate, and he was exiled beyond Christian lands, forbidden sanctuary in any church. His wife, stripped of property and status, was forced into a convent where she wasted away in poverty within 2 years. And for those who resisted but were still forced to trial, the punishments grew harsher still. Hot irons were overheated, stones for water trials were made heavier. Fasting periods were shortened to weaken the accused further. Resistance meant God's judgment would be even deadlier. Even for survivors, life after ordeal was often worse than death. The scars of fire trials, lung damage from near drowning, and permanent deformities left them visibly marked as touched by divine judgment. Marriage prospects vanished. Guilds denied them work. Priests eyed them with suspicion. They lived as outcasts, never able to erase the shadow of what they had endured. Yet by the 12th century, cracks were beginning to show in this towering structure of sanctified pain. Peter Abelard questioned whether demanding miracles was true worship or dangerous arrogance. Scholars at Bologna debated whether human interference corrupted divine judgment. Even Cistercian monks quietly noted that too many ordeals seemed suspiciously convenient in their outcomes, hinting at human manipulation instead of divine intervention. These doubts, whispered in monasteries and universities, would eventually swell into open rejection. But that turning point came only after countless lives, like Willem's, like Margot's, like Godwin's, were consumed by a system that claimed to reveal God's truth through human agony. The collapse, when it came, struck with the force of an earthquake. On November 30th, 1215, Pope Innocent III's Fourth Lateran Council issued Canon 18. With just 17 words of Latin, neither shall anyone in clerical orders take part in trials by fire or hot water. 4 centuries of sanctified torture disappeared from official church law like smoke rising into cathedral rafters. But this wasn't the humanitarian breakthrough we might wish it to be. Innocent III hadn't suddenly grown compassionate toward ordeal victims, nor had he questioned whether God truly intervened in human torture. His motive was far more calculated. The Church was losing control. Every ordeal placed divine authority in the hands of local priests, travelling monks, or regional bishops, men who could claim God had spoken directly through iron and water without Rome's approval. It was a theological democracy, a grassroots form of revelation that threatened the hierarchy of papal power. By abolishing clerical involvement, Innocent III cut off that competing source of authority at its root. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Courts across Europe scrambled for alternatives. England expanded its experiments with jury trials from property disputes to criminal cases. France shifted toward inquisitorial systems where professional judges weighed evidence and testimony. The Holy Roman Empire leaned into trial by combat for nobles, while for commoners, new confession-based procedures emerged, often enforced through systematic torture. The shift happened with dizzying speed. Canterbury's records show ordeal cases ending abruptly after December 1215, replaced within months by jury trials under royal justices. Priests who once blessed glowing irons now administered oaths to jurors. The rituals changed, but the authority remained. And yet, the ban was far from absolute. Remote villages carried on for decades. Mo Abbey recorded water ordeals as late as 1250. Franciscan accounts from Wales describe fire trials conducted by hermits who flatly ignored papal decrees. Worse still, the alternatives quickly proved no less brutal. Where ordeals at least offered the faint hope of divine protection, the new systems relied on human cruelty alone. Confession through torture became standard practice. The Inquisition, born in the wake of ordeal abolition, refined methods of interrogation that made trial by fire seem merciful by comparison. Witch trials followed, their procedures engineered to ensure conviction. The bitter irony is clear. Ending ordeal did not end judicial torture. It simply replaced one form of sanctioned suffering with another, more systematic, more efficient, and often more terrifying. Even today, archaeology continues to reveal this hidden world. At Rievaulx Abbey, excavations uncovered a furnace built solely for ordeal irons, its foundation stones carved with prayers. Renovations at Chartres Cathedral revealed a sealed chamber containing ordeal, pools, iron implements, and stone weights untouched for 8 centuries. And near former ordeal sites, mass graves tell their own story. Bones scarred by burns, lungs marked by drowning, bodies bearing silent witness to a legal system built on agony. If these forgotten chapters reveal anything, it is how thin the line between justice and barbarity can be. Subscribe for more buried truths that reshape our understanding of the past. The abolition of ordeals created the foundation for concepts we now take for granted: evidence, presumption of innocence, rational procedure. But at the same time, it opened the door to more sophisticated persecutions that culminated in witch trials, inquisitorial courts, and state-sponsored torture. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson is the speed of it all. Within a single generation, practices once thought as eternal as the cathedral stones themselves were swept away. only to be replaced by equally brutal systems defended with equal certainty in the name of God and justice. Today, if you walk through Wolfshire, St Bartholomew's Church still stands on its medieval foundations, but you'll find no trace of what happened inside. The Ordeal altar is gone, the consecrated pools filled in, the blessed furnaces dismantled long ago. Yet the capacity for systematic cruelty, the ability of rational, educated people to construct elaborate justifications for torture and call it divine service, remains as human as the compassion that eventually rose up to reject it.